You're watching Life Report. Pro-life talk. Real-world answers. Life Report trains people to more effectively defend their pro-life beliefs while honestly examining the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. We're the show other pro-lifers may have warned you about. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. Oh, this is so cool. Okay, we have a great show lined up today.
Yes,
we have a live remote guest for the first time we've ever done this, and it's been crazy trying to make it happen. I appreciate our live listeners for being patient with us, getting through the technical difficulties. We have Jay Watts from Life Training Institute on the line. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
It's really
glad
good.
to have you.
It's good to have you on here. So topic today, we have discussed this briefly a few times now.
Several times, I think.
Several times
little
now.
bits through episodes throughout the ages.
It's happened before, but we're going to expand today. We have a piece of listener mail from Ali. She says, what do you think about a pro-life argument highlighting the fact that Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, was a racist and a eugenicist? Love the show. Keep up the great work, Ali. So here's the question I want to get into today. Is Planned Parenthood, the entity today, is Planned Parenthood a racist organization? There are a lot of pro-lifers that think they are. Say most pro-lifers probably think they are. I've seen Moffat 21. There's a lot of websites, plannedparenthood.org, blackgenocide.org, that would basically say Planned Parenthood has a goal of wanting to kill black babies more than anybody else. So we're going to get into that today. I would ask my listeners this, because this is a controversial topic.
Oh, okay. Just a little.
Keep an open mind. I mean, I'm open to my view being wrong. I don't even know what Jay's view on it. Jay might actually we might even get into a debate.
We
haven't really done a pre-interview.
This could be very exciting.
This could be very exciting. But either way, keep an open mind. Consider an alternative viewpoint. There are 4 pro-arguments for Planned Parenthood being racist that we're going to respond to today. The first one would be Margaret Sanger. And that's where Jay is going to come in, because Jay has done a lot of research on Margaret Sanger.
The idea that she was racist.
The idea that she was racist, and just about her in general.
Gotcha.
But yeah, the idea being Margaret Sanger was a racist. She wanted less black people, so she started Planned Parenthood. The location of Planned Parenthood clinics.
Minority neighborhoods.
Many Planned Parenthood clinics are in minority neighborhoods, so people would say that makes them racist. Just the stats alone. So many African American people have abortions, per capita compared to Caucasian people. That would be the other one. And then the fourth that I see a lot is the live action racism project that they did with a phone call. So let's start at the top. And Jay, you've done a lot of research on Margaret Sanger. If you could just take a couple of minutes and tell us basically what you learned as you read a bunch of books and did a lot of research. Give us just a basic picture of Margaret Sanger and what you think her actual agenda was in starting the Birth Control Federation, which became Planned Parenthood.
Well, I guess you have to break down with Margaret Sanger a couple of different things. There were 2 key events that seemed to influence her more than any other events as far as forming her activist or advocate role. One of them would be the death of her mother. She was the 6th of 11 children, and her mother had had actually 18 pregnancies, so 7 of them ended in miscarriage. This was over a period of, I think, 22 years. So for that 22 years, 18 years of which she was pregnant, it took a toll on her body, and her mother died young of a combination of tuberculosis and cervical cancer. Now, this was very obviously emotionally trying time for Margaret Sanger, but she, it was reported, blamed her father for this at the time of her mother's death, even going so far as to scream at her father that he had done this, that it was the trial of the constant pregnancies that had cost her mother her life. Her mother was a devout Catholic. Her father was an atheist and a socialist. So that was one of the formation events of her life. The other would be an episode that happened with a woman, Margaret Sanger became, after marrying William Sanger, became a nurse and moved to east side of Manhattan, which was a terribly impoverished area, terribly overcrowded. And there she had an episode with a young woman named Sadie Sachs and her husband, Jake Sachs. She had been out to Sadie Sachs' apartment. Margaret would treat these people who were dealing with, a lot of times she would deal with people who'd done botched abortions or who were dealing with trying to end pregnancies on their own because they were just having so many children, and these women had no ability to space their children out. And the idea of Margaret Sanger. So what happened with Sadie was that she went and took care of Sadie after a botched abortion. And Sadie asked the doctor at that time, what can I do to avoid having to have this happen again? The doctor's only advice that he could give her was something to the effect of abstinence, or even there was one report that he said that her husband needed to sleep on the roof instead of in the house. So after months later, she was called back to that same apartment where Sadie Sachs was found dead of a botched abortion. And this impacted her dramatically. That was the formative moment in her life, and she said it was going to become her life's goal was to teach and educate people on what she and her organization termed birth control. It was that they came up with that word, that phrase, birth control. And so that Sadie Sachs episode really launched her, and with that background with her mother and the pain of what had happened there, into a life of advocacy, pushing for the idea of birth control. Now, interesting about Margaret Sanger, I think, when you look into her, is that this was not a move that was driven out of any kind of compassion or love for the people that she actually worked with. She admits that during her time, she got no fulfillment with working with these poor or lower class individuals, and it drove her to see a problem. And this is where she links her birth control efforts into the eugenicist movement. I mean, she was a passionate advocate of the eugenicist movement. She believed that birth control was a part of that. And I find that interesting because her writing on the Sadie Sachs thing was so powerful, and it was such an emotional appeal to the people that are listening. And you can see how she could start to build that following from that. But even if you look between the story, you see someone that walked away from it whose ultimate goal is not that people like Sadie Sachs ought to be cared for, that people like Sadie Sachs ought not to be allowed to have children at all.
Wow. A question for you, Jay, would be, I listened to a talk by Angela Franks, who wrote a book on Margaret Sanger, and the point that she made after having done a bunch of research was that she felt like Sanger was definitely into negative eugenics. She definitely wanted to limit how many people or how many babies are being born from poor or unhealthy people. Angela Franks felt like there wasn't really proof that we could tell whether she was actually a racist, that she actually discriminated against people that had that were from a different place or had a different skin color. What's your take on that?
Well, there was a couple of different intellectual influences on Margaret Sanger that are important to point out. One of them is that she was a dyed-in-the-wool neo-Malthusianist. If you don't know what that means, it comes from Thomas Robert Malthus, and he was a man who came up with a philosophy and wrote a book on the idea that the world was heading towards overpopulation, and the resources of the world were going to be stretched beyond the capacity to serve this exponentially growing population of Earth. And so she had a neo-Malthusian background. Actually, before she decided to call it a birth control movement, she flirted with the idea of calling it the neo-Malthusian movement, and it maintained a part of the literature and her approach to it during her whole entire career. And in addition to that, she was a social Darwinist. It's easy for us to forget, growing up in the world that we've lived in, that with Margaret Sanger being born in 1879 and The Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin being published in 1859, that she lived during a time when Darwin's theories were being not just exploding into popular consciousness in the United States, but also at a time when they were being misapplied to all sorts of other areas, which was really where the root of the eugenicist movement in the United States came from. And so Margaret Sanger had these two influences of social Darwinism and also of neo-Malthusianism. When you ask me if she's a racist, I actually have an interesting, I thought about that I guess for me as I was processing this, because Edwin Black in his book, War Against the Weak, categorically denies that she was a racist. Joseph Della Pena in his Dispelling of Abortion Myths categorically states that she was racist. But really, racism is almost too limiting a term. There is no doubt that the eugenicist movement that she was a part of was wildly racist, and that she was involved and deeply involved, even putting people on her board of directors at the American Birth Control Society that were deeply, outspokenly, dyed-in-the-wool, racist, and white supremacists. Margaret Sanger herself, though, it's hard to peg that on her, but that's not a good thing, because I think that racism is almost too limiting a term with her. She wanted a limitation on the amount of people that were allowed to be born, which she acutely called human waste. And within the category of human waste was certainly poor Black people, but also poor people of all immigrants societies and poor people across the country, and anybody that was considered not intelligent enough, not a breeding class that we wanted to keep going. So negative eugenics, definitely. I mean, she absolutely was outspoken in those areas.
Okay, so the question of the hour, Jay, on Sanger, because we need to move on to the other three reasons, is because for us to trying to even determine if modern Planned Parenthood is a racist entity, do you believe Margaret Sanger probably being racist can tell us anything about modern Planned Parenthood's desires or
I think even if it's not just, even though we're looking at Margaret Sanger, would be at those infant stages of Planned Parenthood, was the organization a racist organization?
Yeah. That would basically be what my question is. Was it a racist organization? I would say let's just assume that it was. Does that tell us anything about modern Planned Parenthood's core values and what they want? What do you think, Jay?
That I don't know. I mean, when you and I first talked about doing this show, and this is actually an area where I am not. I joke all the time with you, Josh, and I just don't know a lot about what's going on in the pro-life movement because I'm so obsessed with the subjects that I'm always studying. And so when you first brought this up, I thought, well, I don't see how it applies. You know, one way that I do think it actually applies to today was I went and looked at Planned Parenthood's website, because as a development as a development professional, you look at what their mission statement is now and whether or not they're fulfilling that mission statement and how they are doing on the goals that they've set for themselves. They have not distanced themselves from their past in a way that makes me comfortable. Actually, they brag at one point about how they've been providing all of this great health care for 90 years. Well, the beginning of their organization was steeped in eugenics movement. And as we said, the eugenics movement was deeply racist. And so I do think if they are going to say that 90 years applies to how you view them today, then it might be fair to say, okay, well, let's look at the full 90 years and let's look at that. Whether or not Margaret Sanger matters today, I don't really believe she does matter that much today.
Let's talk about the stats. There are a much greater percentage of African-American women and also Hispanic women versus, as compared to Caucasians that are having abortions. And so do the stats tell us that
Do you have any of those stats? I mean, what are roughly some of those,
It's roughly, I just knew you would ask me that question. I honestly don't have it in front of me. I mean,
I know, but
it's roughly, I believe it's roughly twice as many African-American abortions per capita per white. Someone on the Facebook is immediately going to put in the correct answer to that. I don't have it in front of me. But it's more per capita. I mean, there's no question about it. So does that tell us anything about, I mean, in the end, they are killing more Black babies.
Okay, I would just propose that I think it's much more a socioeconomic issue, and especially modern day. The whole trend nationwide is a helping movement towards the lower classes and offering free services to those who are socially, economically underprivileged.
Okay.
And so I think that, honestly, in my opinion, Planned Parenthood is catering to the popular opinion of the day, which is to provide a free service to the underprivileged.
Right.
And so that's my
And many times the underprivileged
happen to be minorities. Yes.
Guttmacher Institute says 30% occur in non-Hispanic Black women.
That's significant.
So the other thing I want to go along with what you were saying, Liz. I believe there's also even my thing is always, is there an alternative possible viewpoint that makes even more sense of the situation? And so to me, I wonder, what if modern Planned Parenthood staffers, and we know, if you read Abby Johnson's books, he says a lot of the people at Planned Parenthood are really loving, really caring people. They really want to help people. So let's go with that.
So you're talking about the persons or the
people
whole?
that are working at modern Planned Parenthood clinics.
Yeah, but
the individuals. I would say no. I would say absolutely not.
Right. I'm wondering if for or even at corporate Planned Parenthood level, what if they actually just really, really care about helping people who can't afford, more expensive birth control methods or abortions to have those services. And so they would put themselves, this goes to the minority neighborhood thing too, they put themselves in minority neighborhoods where it's easier to access them. I stood outside 40 Days for Life for 6 hours at a time. I know how many people go to our Planned Parenthood that take the bus or walk. They don't necessarily all drive. And so I'm wondering if that might be an alternative explanation for why